We got coffee. We got water. I think we're good. We got everything we need. So before we get going, I thought it'd be a good idea for me to kind of give a reason why I want to do this. So, and it can kind of be the trailer or the teaser, but this is going to be the first of many. May even come back to you a couple more times. So this is going to be the first of many, and I'm titling it "Come to the Table," because I think about all the memories we've shared around your table, around Grandma and Grandpa McKnight's table, around Paul and Roberta's table. My whole life growing up, we shared a lot of stories around the table. So that's why I've entitled it "Come to the Table." But it's also important for me to get your salvation story or your testimony. I've heard things my whole life. There's been people like yourself that's been influential in my life, and I really want to get that out. I think about Grandpa McKnight, and I've heard his testimony, but from you. I never got it from him, or I don't recall hearing it from him. And I'm sure he shared it behind the pulpit. I know he shared his love for Psalms 91. And I share that same passion. That's something I remember from him. But why that scripture meant that much to him, I don't know why. I know bits and pieces about why Isaiah 9:6 means so much to you, because I've heard your testimony from behind the pulpit.
Right.
But really what kicked this off for me is several months ago now, I think it was last year, sitting in church on a Sunday morning, Pastor CJ was speaking on Isaiah 9:6. And I knew that verse. It's obviously something that I grew up hearing. And something you may not know is when I was at God's Bible School, 6th grade, I was in a Christmas program where I was a little cowboy in search for baby Jesus. Do you remember any part of that?
No.
Okay,
that probably was on security duty outside.
That could have been the case. But I remember Big Mark Stetler said that I made him cry when I was singing. I don't know if you remember that, but I remember Mark Stetler was the real big guy, and he come to me in tears saying how beautiful the song was, which I didn't even remember the song. I don't remember much about that play, other than I had a large speaking part, and I was talking to the shepherds in the skit about baby Jesus and where we could find him. And I quoted Isaiah 9:6. And I remember the gal that was in charge. I don't know if it was Mrs. Crosley. I don't know who was in charge of it. It was probably one of Brother Wolf's daughters. I don't know. So whoever was in charge of it, she was amazed that I didn't need much practice for that long speaking skit, because I had to recite Isaiah 9:6. Well, I already knew that because of hearing it from you so many times. So anyway, so fast forward, I'm sitting in church just about a year ago with Pastor CJ preaching on Isaiah 9:6. And it was during his message, he talked about a close brother, Christian brother of his, and he started sharing a testimony that was familiar to me. And as I'm listening to the testimony, I was like, oh, he's talking about Dad. And then there were parts of it I was like, maybe he's not talking about Dad. I don't know that part, or I never heard that explained that way before. And then it would come back around. I was like, yeah, that is Dad's testimony. He's talking about Dad. So he never gave you a name. He never said your name. He never made the comparison between you and I or whatnot from behind the pulpit. But he shared your testimony, and it was like a light bulb went off. Like, I've never asked you questions about your testimony. I've aside from hearing you behind the pulpit, that's all I know of your testimony, of what you've shared behind the pulpit. And that's my fault for not being more intentional to get some of those facts straight on your testimony or anything. Right. And so then my head starts turning of, look, all these stories I've heard from you and Paul growing up, I want to know more. I want to know more about it, because your life ultimately affected my life and made me who I am today. Grandpa McKnight's life and his decision to follow Christ ultimately affected the entire McKnight family. Right. And to think back on, he was saved at a camp meeting or something. I
It's a
vaguely
Wednesday night prayer meeting.
I mean, it was just prayer meeting, and he went to prayer meeting, and I don't recall, and we can get into it a little later. I don't recall how it came about or what the message was about, what led him to the altar. But I remember it was obviously in a prayer meeting that he gave his life to God. And I think about myself, what if he wouldn't have?
At 17.
At 17, what if he wouldn't have? How would the McKnight family have turned out? How would that have affected your life? How would that affect my life? Because it ultimately affected yours. And it just trickles downhill.
Right.
And so I think about all these testimonies, all these stories to share. And then I look at everyone around me, family, friends, you, Mom, Josh and Angie and their testimony, and just the impact that everyone's had on my life. It's fascinating, and I want to know more. But more importantly, I can't help but think about the disciples being with Jesus and writing about their accounts. And they all kind of heard things differently. They all kind of wrote a little differently about some of the events that happened. But I'm like, how do we continue? Like, why aren't we writing Bible number 2 of our life and how we've applied God to our life, our everyday life, how He's blessed us, how He saved us, how He, story after story. I mean, that's what the Bible is. And so part of me wants to continue that just for our family, more importantly. But I want my kids and my great grandkids, which will be your great great grandkids, to know your testimony.
I got to be a great first.
You're going to be a great first, but I'm talking about my grandkids, which are your great great grandkids. Yeah. It's just I want people to know. Right. And so the idea behind this is exactly that: to share stories, to share your salvation story, to know more, and at the minimum, we pass this down to my kids and my kids' kids, and whoever else wants them. That's what it should be about. And I regret never taking the time to get to know Grandpa McKnight's testimony or Grandma McKnight's testimony. I never asked them, and I think what pieces of it I know is I've heard from you.
Probably.
And so there's just a lot of unanswered questions, and I want to make sure to start getting it out there. And a lot of people I have on my list to interview, I feel like I'm going to have to do pretty quickly. Uncle Peter's one of them. I'd love to know his story. I've never sat down and talked to the guy. Grandma Pat, obviously Mom. I want to talk to Josh, Uncle Paul, and Aunt Roberta. We all have stories to share. Right. And we've shared them, but just never in a capacity where we can pass it down. I think with today's technology, despite us probably having some technical difficulties today, I think we can get the gist of it down. So that's where I'm at with all this, and that's what I want to achieve. So to kick us off, let's say a quick prayer that God will just bless our conversation, our fellowship. Right. Thank you, Lord, for this day and for this opportunity to sit down at the table with Dad. Just bless our conversation and bless our fellowship together, and just bless whatever you want to do with this project, God. It's in your hands, and I can trust and be at peace with that. Thank you for all that you've done, and we love you. Amen. Okay, so you're born and raised in Florida.
Born in Marion, Indiana.
You're born and raised in Marion, Indiana, but you grew up in Florida.
At 2 years old, we moved to Fort Myers.
So why was Grandma and Grandpa, what made the move when you were 2 years old? You were born and raised, you were born here.
Rigdon, Indiana is where actually we were living at the time.
When you were born?
Apparently when I was born, but I was born in Grant County, so that's still Grant County. Dad and Mom was at a Pilgrim Holiness church there on Boot Street, and Dad was the Sunday school teacher there.
At a church in Rigdon?
Marion. Right down the street from where our church is at right now.
What was the name of the church? Do you even know?
Boot Street's Pilgrim Holiness.
Boot Street's Pilgrim Holiness.
Still there.
Is it really? Where at?
Boot Street.
In Marion?
In Marion.
How far from Adams Street?
2 blocks over, just right off 38th Street.
Is it still Pilgrim Holiness Church?
I don't know if it's still a church, but the building's still there.
Interesting.
That's where Tommy Wilson come in and Paul Brown. They become their Sunday school teachers.
Okay. So he's a Sunday school teacher at Boot Street, Pilgrim Holiness. I never knew that. which is in
So
Marion.
Dad's 30 years older than me, and so if I was 2, he was 32 when we moved to Florida.
Okay. So before we get too much into the moving to Florida, if Grandpa was 32 already teaching Sunday school, what is his testimony? How did he get saved? How did that start for him to go down that path?
Well, he was 17 and he was at a prayer meeting, and he talks about that somebody on the left side of him stood up and testified, and somebody on the right side stood up and testified, and he felt like he needed to testify. We didn't have a testimony.
That's a problem.
So he stood up and said something like, well, would like to be saved someday, or something like that.
Yeah.
That was, but his dad was a backslid Methodist minister.
So your grandpa, McKnight, was a minister for United Methodist Church. And
backslid.
When you say backslid, what do you mean?
He quit the ministry.
So turned his back on God, or just got out of ministry altogether, or did he just find a job and needed to make money?
Actually, the story, if I can remember it right, it was during the Depression. They were not making it very well. They lived in Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, but in Ohio, Chattanooga, Ohio, I think it is. And Grandpa was a circuit minister, and they were starving. And Grandpa and Grandma Pierce offered him an 8-acre farm, but he had to give up the ministry to do it. And so they gave up the ministry, and they come to Muncie or Cowan, Indiana, and they took the 80-acre farm.
So did his life reflect a life that is backslidden? Like, did he go back into sin?
No, I don't think. Of course, sin back then would have been totally different than what it was now, because back then, even my great-grandpa was not a Christian. He didn't Sabbath day desecrate. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke. You know, I mean, their normal lifestyle was what would become common. I don't remember great-grandpa Pierce, but Mick does.
Okay.
But great-grandpa Pierce's wife, who is where the heir of the farm come from, as soon as Grandma and Grandpa come back to take the farm, great-grandma Pierce died.
So Grandpa McKnight, your dad, didn't really grow up in the church. Had all of that taken place when he was a child, I assume?
Yeah, he was young.
So he didn't really he didn't know the Christianity aspect of his dad.
Not per se, although.
Did they still go to church, you think?
I remember Dad talking about walking to church to Cowan by himself.
Okay.
But that was before he was, that was like younger age.
Yeah. So he knew what church was. Something brought him to that prayer meeting at 17.
Right.
So you're not just going to show up for a prayer meeting unless you are aware that they're having a service, or if you attend there somewhat regularly.
If I remember right, it was the Southside Nazarene Church in Muncie that he was at.
Okay.
And that was the prayer meeting.
And that's near that Hoyt Avenue?
Yeah.
Okay.
The original building is different than what it is now, but it's still called Southside Nazarene. And Uncle Max's adopted son just died from that church.
He was a member there?
Yeah.
So Grandpa makes his way to prayer meeting. He's got a guy on his left that stands up and testifies. A guy on his right testifies, and he feels left out, so to speak. Or something bubbled inside him that, hey, I need a testimony. And so he stood up and made a profession of faith, or
I don't think he did it that way.
Or did he just make a commitment? I'm going to live for God so that I can have a testimony?
Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
Okay.
Now, he has another experience later, which is what he calls his sanctification experience. And
how many more years later?
Well, it couldn't have been too much, because he was 17 when that happened.
So what's his sanctification story?
Well, apparently, if I can remember right, he went down to the altar, and God started speaking to him about some of his things in his life, and he said, yes, Lord, and then he decided there was something he wasn't going to say yes, Lord, to. And
you know what it was, or did he ever talk about it?
He talked a little bit about it. There was a public swimming pool called Chewy's Swimming Pool. And we still know where it is today. It's over here off of the bypass in Muncie.
Okay.
You know what it's called? I forget what it's called now, but you can go by it and you can see it's still a swimming pool.
Really?
And swimming lake.
Okay.
Yeah. So you go out on 28, and you get on 3, and you go south, and you go up, and just before you get on the bypass, you'll see it off to the right.
So what about that swimming hole is he struggling with?
He didn't want to give up the swimming pool.
Was it just the immodesty, the mixed bathing?
Yes.
Or was there other things going on there that...
I don't know. I'm going to guess it was the immodesty,
And so that was pretty much frowned upon in
the world,
Christian
no,
faith.
but in the Christian faith,
the mixed bathing.
Mixed bathing is still an issue.
Yeah. So he didn't want to give that up.
He didn't want to give that up.
So what'd he do?
Well, just as he decided, no, I'm not going to do that. Someone whispered to him and said, Charlie, I got you a Bible. And he passed a Bible to him.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he's seen his name on the Bible. He said, Lord, I'll do it.
That was it. That was the writing on the wall. So someone had made a Bible for him and already engraved his name on it?
Because of his previous experience. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, there's some little innuendos there I don't know all about, but I know that was the catalyst
that's what made him to submit.
Mm-hmm.
That was God's way of saying, no, you need to give that up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
he didn't know he was going to meet Mom yet. So
he hadn't met Grandma.
No. Mm-hmm.
So
I know of,
yeah.
I don't think so.
So when did Grandma come into the picture?
Well, then he took a farming job in Hartford City on a farm.
Does he tell a story about walking down the fence row while he was on that farming and cussing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's all I know about it, but I remember
they gave him the job of cleaning out the fence row with an axe. And he had a foul mouth.
Uh-huh.
Like we all would
sure.
At one point, and he kept God, I'm sorry. It just keeps coming out. And finally he said that fence row broke him of swearing.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Now that's, again, what I can remember.
Yeah. So he's working on the farm and he eventually meets Grandma. Grandma's from that area?
Yeah. She's actually was living at what we called the Girl Scout camp.
Yeah.
But we had our...
that's
where they lived at, right outside
in that property.
Right outside of Wheeling.
Okay, because I know that area.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've talked about that.
And he was working in Hartford City, which is close, on a dairy farm.
Do you know how they met? Or did they ever talk about it? At church?
I don't know if I could say that's how they met. Maybe it was.
I'm just going to check to make sure everything's still going.
She at 13 had made her commitment to walk with God.
Now, did they go to the same church together?
No, but I think the event, Pleasant something church, it's still there too.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think is where they actually met
at like a church camp meeting or something.
Something. I don't know if I can pull that one together.
Okay.
But I know that where Wheeling is and where Hartford City is, and somewhere in there, Dad was working on a farm.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to think of the name of the guy's farm who he worked on. But it was very familiar.
Yeah. Did he ever go to college or anything?
He did eventually after the military.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll get to that, I'm sure. But you said a few minutes ago, I remember Grandma Wilma talking about getting saved at such a young age.
13.
Did she go into any more detail of or was it one of those just at a young age? Obviously.
Well, she said she was a horrible liar, and her dad, which was a horrible liar, accused her of being a horrible liar, and she just felt convicted.
Like, hey, I'm done with this.
Mm-hmm. And she
13 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine the heartache it could save people from if they could grasp that at 13? I look at the twins who are 11, and I see their minds turning. I mean, they get it. They're starting to get it, and they're starting to understand, especially the more they're in the Word with Sunday school and stuff. And so when I was a teenager, I remember thinking about, how did grandma get saved at 13? There's no way. But now that I see it in my own daughters, I'm like, they get it.
I think Grandpa Case also backslid, and he was called to be a missionary.
And grandma's
dad.
Grandma's dad? Huh. Interesting. I haven't heard that story, but I didn't really know.
No, you wouldn't have known.
I just know grandma and her brothers, essentially.
Yeah, you would know the brothers because of how many of them were left. And Uncle Butch may be able to tell you more about Grandpa Case about that situation. So Uncle Jim.
Yeah. So grandma's 13. She doesn't like being a liar.
I think her dad called her out on it.
For lying? Interesting. And that was the last straw for her.
I'm going to guess.
Yeah. So fast forward a few years, obviously. What was the age difference between grandpa and grandma?
They were the same age.
They were the same age? Okay. So grandpa kind of found his salvation a little later in life than grandma did, but their worlds kind of came together through church, and that's how they met.
Yes.
So how old was grandpa when he went to the military?
Well, I can only guess at this point. See, Grandpa had quit high school, hitchhiked out to California, and Grandma and Grandpa McKnight had to go get him.
And why did he do that?
Well, his brother, and I think it was Max, joined the military and was out there in California.
Oh, kind of like what happened with Isaac.
Somewhat, and can you imagine hitchhiking back there? And say if I'm 56, he's 30, so at least 30 years before that. So that would be what, 1936? He hitches like,
you know how long of a drive that would be
as a 16-year-old boy.
Yeah, I mean, I can go at 90 miles an hour on the interstate. Those cars. Max, probably Route 66 was a thing.
No,
or wasn't even.
Most of the time it was.
I mean, they're one step above an ox in a wagon.
Yeah.
So he hitchhikes out to California,
and that was before 17. So he was 16 when he did that.
Oh, okay. So he went out there to be with his brother out in California.
I think so. I think that's why. I know that's why he went.
How did great grandma and grandpa get him back? How'd they find him? There's no cell phones.
Well, there was phones. Or telegraph.
So he
got out there.
So they knew where he was staying.
And I think he telegraphed them or something, and they went out and got him.
How'd they get out there?
Drove.
Incredible.
Yeah.
The butt kicking he would have gotten. I can only imagine. So he's out in California, comes back, then he gets saved.
Right.
Then he's struggling with the water hole issue, and so he's kind of bickering back and forth with God about that. Someone hands him a Bible with his name on it.
Somebody got
why he was at the altar.
Printed a Bible for him, and for whatever previously had taken place, somebody felt like they needed to get him a Bible.
And that was it.
When he seen that, he said
that was it. That's awesome. Something so small like that, but how God talks differently to all of us.
Look what he was not going to give up.
Right.
Everything God would.
It sounds stupid.
Yeah.
But when you look back at some of the things that I struggled with, even more so now looking back, I'm like, how stupid. How stupid. Why would that have been an issue, or why is that an issue of all the sin? Why was that one little thing the one that was keeping me from finding that peace? All right, so grandma and grandpa get married first, or grandpa goes off to the military?
They're married.
Okay.
Grandma moves to Grandma McKnight's house and stays in Dad's bedroom. And right immediately he goes off to the military.
So they got married. Grandma moves in with his parents, and then he's off.
He's gone.
Do you know how long they dated or anything, or what that courtship was like? Did they talk about it? Because I obviously know a little bit of your story.
Okay, so Mick's almost 10 years older than me. Mick's their firstborn.
So they didn't have Mick before the military?
No.
Okay.
And Mom said it's because I didn't have a husband is why I didn't have a child first. He was going in the military.
So they literally got married and he's gone.
And he's gone. Mm-hmm.
And what do you know about his military experience?
He was an MP, in the Army, a guard on the island of Guam.
So he's an MP in the island of Guam. How long was he there?
I think he was there a year and a half.
So this is during World War II?
Just after World War II,
just after
before the Korean War.
Okay.
Right in that little
there's a little window
slot there.
Did he ever talk much about his military experience?
He was over. There was Japanese soldiers that were prisoners there. He was in charge of the gate, and he passed out tracts to people that come through the gate, the military,
like Christian material.
Like Christian material.
He was did he write them up, or
I don't know where he got them, but
he
was mentioned in one of the newspapers of an MP that was passing out Christian materials, and in some military magazine somewhere there would be that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So obviously he kept the faith to his military experience. Mm-hmm. How long did he serve altogether, or was it just that short stint?
You remember? I'm going to say a year and a half. He was gone, so I don't know. I don't know.
When he came back, now I don't know how much of this is made up, or if my mind's kind of combining stories. But I remember maybe it was Grandpa telling a story about when he came back and how some of the soldiers were not allowed to come back because of some STDs or something.
Yeah, there was some of that. He did say that. And
it was because he kept himself pure and committed to his wife that he was allowed back on. But the military guys that had tested positive for STDs, they weren't allowed to come back.
They weren't allowed to go home
until they were tested clean or anything.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. There was some of that, though. I remember him saying that.
Okay.
And there was alcohol on that military base there, and he said many of the officers were drunks.
Yeah. Yeah, sadly, that's seems to be what a lot of, obviously on my side of law enforcement, you deal with a lot of military guys, and that's what they had to go to. But it was our government's fault for providing it for them.
Well, putting them in that kind of place.
Putting them in that environment. Okay, so Grandpa comes back. Does he remember, was there any wartime while he was there, or was it just he was policing the base?
He was virtually right after the bomb, atom bomb, from what I remember.
So he went after the atom bomb.
He was in, but I think he actually got shipped out after the atom bomb.
Okay. So he comes back home, what is he, 20, 22, 23 maybe?
Well, I'm 30. I mean, he's 30 years older than me. Mick's 10 years, so it's 40. So he would have been, I don't know if I can do the math.
Yeah.
Somewhere in his early
20s. Yeah. He comes back, Grandma's waiting for him. Did they continue to live with his parents that you know of? Or they lived near that farm, right?
They moved to, and I'm pretty sure, maybe I'm not 100% sure. They moved to a little farmhouse, and they went to. Oh, okay. Maybe my mistake is that he didn't get saved in Southside Nazarene, but he went to a revival at Southside Nazarene after he came back from the military, and a singing group was there from Pilgrim Holiness in Frankfort, Indiana. A quartet.
That little Bible college, which is no longer there, right?
The Pilgrim camp is still there, but the Bible college, eventually Paul went there too. And he felt like he needed to go to the Bible college.
So he's back from the military.
Mick's born by this time.
Young wife, young kid, and it was at a revival that he felt.
I'm pretty sure that was the
felt led to ministry. Essentially, or just he needed to go to college?
You need to go to college, Bible college.
So he went to,
Frankfurt Pilgrim College at the time.
Frankfurt Pilgrim College. How long was he there for?
He was in his third year there.
Did he graduate?
He did not.
Okay.
There was a real push at the time that Jesus was going to come back, and there wasn't time for him to finish school. He needed to get to the ministry.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Was that orchestrated by the college, you think? Like,
even Anderson College was real bad about that, and I say bad because there was Bill Heimer, who was apparently a very famous evangelist, but from the Anderson Bible School at the time,
mm-hmm.
and apparently they got on this rapture train that really I'm going to say his name. I'll say his name in a minute, but the guy who actually started that was a Jew. I won't be able to think of his name anyway. He wrote a Bible. He has a Bible. Even today, you can still get his Bible.
So there was a push for hey, Jesus is coming back. We got to save
evangelism.
Souls. And so Grandpa felt led to just leave where he was at and start evangelizing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what led him to Sunday school teaching?
No, he ended up in Monticello, Indiana.
What did he do up there?
I took a church.
So he leaves after his third year, feels led into ministry immediately because the rapture's coming, goes up and starts preaching in Monticello.
Mm-hmm.
What was the name of that church? Do you remember?
Yes, I will.
And this is before you.
Oh, yeah, this is just Mick.
Just Mick at the time. Okay. Either way, was it a Pilgrim Holiness Church as well?
I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah. And it had 6 people in it.
How long did he preach there?
A couple years.
Okay.
Okay. And he, of course, I think then Tim was born there. I think you could find that out. It's not called Monticello. It's right next to Monticello.
Rensselaer?
Mm.
No. Just up there somewhere.
It's, well, if you drove up to Monticello, you'd almost go right to it. And the name's familiar. I just can't pull it up.
So he preaches there for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm. And during the Frankfurt conference, his church had got up to 60.
It started off with 6
and up to 60. So he was an evangelist.
That's a big number for those Pilgrim Holiness
for that
churches.
at that time.
Yeah.
And his church come up in conference, and they didn't think he was a capable pastor to handle that size of a church, and so they appointed another pastor.
The politics.
And need to say he did flip flops at that point.
What do you mean? It upset him. Obviously.
Oh yeah,
he grew it. That's his flock.
Yeah, and now they're saying he can't keep it because he can't handle the ministry.
So as soon as he built up a church to start making a little money.
I don't know about the money.
I know, but that's what it appears. Yeah. Politics got involved.
And so they appointed a pastor, somebody to come and take his church. And him and Mom are making the plans to move. And I think he got a job in Marion at the dairy factory.
Okay.
Starts with an S. But where he went around to different farms and got the milk.
Okay. Yeah.
But just
so he left ministry
just because
they kicked him out, basically.
Well, they gave the church to someone else, and just before he left, the guy called up and said, "Hey, I can't come. I'm not coming.
Not coming to take his spot.
I'm coming to take the church." But Dad says, "I'm done anyway," because he had already
committed to going elsewhere.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
That's a tough decision.
Yeah, that was. Now you're.
So do you think like he kind of did what his dad did essentially, and just kind of turned his back on ministry? He was disgruntled.
Well, he was disgruntled at the people that he had put so much stock in. That's for sure.
Was it the people that voted him out, or was it the domination?
The conference.
Okay.
Conference.
So the guy that they
didn't vote him out. They just said, "Hey, they just replaced him.
You can't handle this."
Like they could with Wesleyan Church or Methodist Church. They can replace the pastor.
You got a new pastor.
Mm-hmm.
So he got out of the ministry for a while.
Yeah.
How long?
Well,
a few years. Like, was he in ministry when you were born? That you Obviously,
he's just a Sunday school teacher.
Okay.
So
he's working full time at the dairy farm.
It's not a dairy farm. It's a dairy. It's like a prairie farm.
Okay.
Prairie dairy. There was a place in Marion, and there's also a little restaurant there. It's still there. The building's still there. Everything. And then so he would go around to all these little farms and get the milk. And he was a milk delivery guy. But he always passed either the church that he got saved in or one close to there, over by Hartford City, and he would always pull in and go and have prayer. Because the church was always
open.
Yeah,
they didn't have that stuff. That's interesting. So it kind of brought him back to his roots of where he made that decision. Anyways,
I would say that's really close to it. If it's not the exact church, it was somewhere in that ballpark.
So at some point during this time, they're obviously attending another church. He's helping out with Sunday school.
He goes to the Pilgrim Boot Street.
Yep.
10th grade.
And he starts teaching Sunday school. That's where he ultimately met some of the members of his future church.
His future church and future family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Paul Brown is Paula.
That's right. So he was Paul Brown's Sunday school teacher, which ended up marrying one of his daughter ended up marrying one of his sons. So when you were born, he was still a Sunday school teacher. You're a couple years into life when the tables flipped and you guys
were heading to Fort Myers, Florida to be, well, there was a turnover there at that church, and the pastor's wife decided she wanted to be a youth teacher.
Where?
At the Boot Street Pilgrim Church.
Did that bump him out?
Bumped him out.
Oh, so he was teaching the youth more or less as a Sunday school teacher for the teens. And the pastor's wife said, hey, I want to do this. And so he kind of got kicked out of his position again.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeez.
You think that?
So how did he find? Did he initially go to Florida to work, or was there a church that he was asked to run or start?
No church.
So why did they go to Florida?
Apparently there was a revival and there was a call for missionaries, and somehow Fort Myers, Florida was one of those places that, they called them homeland missionaries.
So just no foundation, no church, just go and start it out of your home, essentially.
And we did. We had a lot of out of home churches for a while.
So did he just walk the neighborhoods and like introduce himself and, hey, we're going to have church. Let me tell you about Jesus.
He was just a more or less evangelist,
Yeah. In Fort Myers.
And
so his ministry in Fort Myers grew to where he eventually had a church.
We did have a structure. It didn't have a floor yet. It didn't have a heat or anything. There was no floor in it yet when we left. But there was windows, doors, and roof and blocks.
How many people did he have coming, do you think?
Well, I don't know. There's an actual picture of one of the Sunday school pictures of maybe 50, 60 people there.
Really?
You can find that picture somewhere. Either Neoma or Becky has it.
So he started this church from scratch. Grandma and him keep having kids because now.
Well, I'm number 5, and I was 5 when we left.
Okay, so.
And Grandpa Case didn't want me and Paul to go, so he offered to keep Paul and I.
Down in Florida?
No, up here.
Oh, I got you.
Because we were pretty small.
Grandma said no to that.
Mom said no.
Family's coming with me.
Yeah.
So there was probably some family back here saying, hey, you guys are crazy. What are you doing?
Everybody's, on her side for sure. Now, when there was a construction started, Grandpa McKnight come down and shoveled the first pile
of dirt,
the first hole. And there's a picture of that too.
Huh. Interesting.
And Dad's uncles had a concrete business in Bradenton, Florida.
Okay.
And they come down and laid the block, which is about 2 hours away from where I live. And the McKnights in Bradenton are still McKnights in Bradenton.
There. Yeah. Huh. Do you and you were in Florida for 5 years?
8.
8 years. So you would have been 10 years old when they came home? What are some of your, because I remember when we traveled to Florida, we'd always go to some big tree
the banyan tree.
Yeah. And it was a tree that you guys played on as kids and would like carve your name as like one of these, had low branches. You could climb way up in there. It had Spanish moss all over it. And I remember touring that as a young kid myself, and just kind of reminiscing when we would go down to, well, it was on one of our many trips to Bahamas. We'd always stop by there. Do you remember much of your childhood in Florida?
I remember a lot, actually. I was 2 when we went, so first couple of years I can't remember, but
like, did you play baseball? Did you guys just run around the neighborhoods?
I was on the Little League team.
Okay.
Tim was on a baseball team. Tim hit home runs. I remember that out of Billy Bowleg's park. That's what it was called. Billy Bowleg's was a
local legend.
Indian, a Seminole Indian.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's where the Indians were down there, were Seminoles.
So they had a park out to them. So there's a lot of this normal childhood stuff going on at this point. What did Grandma do? Was she just part of the ministry, or did she work? Like,
she did the Sunday school teaching, for the kids.
She always did that,
and flannel graphs. But we would have that inside our house in the living room. She would do that with the kids in the neighborhood.
How'd they have money?
Well, Dad worked.
So he worked and evangelized. It wasn't his full-time job while he was down there.
No, and he didn't have no support. And he actually founded it as a Pilgrim Holiness church. But the Pilgrim Holiness never backed him.
They never supported it. So they didn't send him down there.
No.
Do you remember where he worked at, or what did he do down in Florida?
He did concrete.
Okay. Hard labor.
Driving the concrete truck.
Oh, okay.
He did driving truck for state highway. He did guard for prison. He was a security guard for prison, and so the chain gang go along the highways. Yeah. He was one of those guards
that were watching
that with him. He worked at the International House of Pancakes as a dishwasher at nighttime.
HOP.
And he, them are the ones I can remember that he actually did.
Interesting. So they were able to scrape by financially.
By pennies.
Do you ever remember you being, like, would you consider yourself poor growing up? Looking back?
Well, I wouldn't have known we were poor, no. But, people look on us, they would have maybe said that. We were, when you take people who lived down there like Thomas Edison and that group on the one side that's got yachts, the guy who owns there's
definitely an exceptionally rich and then an
very exceptional rich area down there, and we went and toured the yachts after Sunday night church a lot of times, just to walk on the docks
and walk
the docks and stuff like that. Yeah.
Do you remember much about your house?
The one on Mohawk Street, I remember that. My mom painted a mural, a picture on one of the walls. Tim and Dave's room. Paul and I slept in another room. I don't know where Mick slept. I don't know. It's just a 3-bedroom, and then Neoma was born and Mark was born down there. So we ended up with 7 of us in that 3-bedroom house.
A little crowded. So what drove? Because you were there 8 years. So what drove Grandpa to leave the ministry down there? What do you remember that conversation, or was there opportunity elsewhere? Because he started this church, had probably 50, 60. He was probably starting to be able to fund him or fund the family, whether he chose to do that or not.
Yeah, I don't know. The property was donated, and some of the work was donated, and a lot of things were donated for that. A well was dug. At that time, he didn't have city water out there.
And he probably just lobbied to get all those given to him.
I remember a couple of times he had a fish fry to raise money.
Raising money.
Now, just before we went to Florida, and because Daddy got hired in at Dana. Just before we went to Florida.
Which is a good factory job.
Yeah, which was real.
So before he made the decision to go do evangelizing down in Florida, he gets a pretty nice job.
Real good job.
And he left it.
Yeah, he left that to go to be the missionary in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of a disturbing to somewhat because he didn't get the financial support he thought he was going to get from the Pilgrim Holiness.
Mm-hmm.
Mom's brother, Uncle Bud, was a pastor of a Pilgrim Holiness church.
In Florida?
No, in Evansville, Indiana.
Okay.
And they had taken up $500 in missions offering for the Fort Myers work.
Okay.
But Frankfurt Pilgrim says that they're not a part of our work, and so they wouldn't send the money.
So what they have against Grandpa? Or were they just...
I don't know if they really had against... He just had a really straightforward Christian testimony and evangelized, you know.
Yeah.
There's a couple other things that may have interfered, but I don't know of exactly when they were or what they were, but that created a problem for Uncle Bud too, you know, because they took that money up for that.
Yeah, they took it for his sister.
But they shouldn't have went through the...
Yeah, they should have just sent him money.
Yeah, just should have sent the money.
That's crazy.
And that time, $500 would have been like $10,000.
Yeah, that'd have been huge.
Huge.
So there was naturally a drawback to get him back to Indiana because he had the job at
Mick graduated from high school
down in Florida,
and he was going to come up here and go to Indiana Bible School here in Marion, Indiana.
Indiana Wesleyan?
It wasn't Wesleyan at the time? No, it was Marion Bible College.
Okay. So Mick wanted to come back up here to go to college.
He was going to go to Bible college.
What was he going to go to school for? Just for ministry, or did he have... Because obviously he never, from my knowledge, never got involved in ministry.
No, I don't know. You'd have to ask him for a closer detail. But Uncle Russ and all them lived up here, which was close to Mick, and they were going to house him, and he was going to go to...
So it was a good fit for him to come back up here.
But he got drafted at that time.
So after he graduated, before he was able to go to college, he gets drafted.
I think he actually got started, but he gets drafted.
He gets drafted for Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. And you can ask him them for more detailed questions. I can't.
Yeah, I don't know.
I can't answer it too.
I don't know a whole lot.
But Dad said, "Well, I'm going to go with you." Dana says I can come back to work. I'm going to work for 6 months and make up and send money back to us in Florida.
So the ministry, the family needed some money.
Yeah, we didn't have none.
And so Grandpa comes back with Uncle Mick.
Gets to Dana.
He had his job at Dana, sitting there waiting, and he was going to send some money back down to the family. Or was his plan to come back for ministry?
Well, he said he was going to do this for 6 months and
then see where
they're at financially and stuff.
Okay. So during that 6 month period, you're down there with your other siblings and Grandma.
Mm-hmm.
How did Grandma rule the nest without Grandpa's heavy hand?
Well, Mick's gone, so you have Tim as the oldest. And Tim, you know, of course, Tim was mowing yards and making money at that, and Dave was mowing yards and making money at that. I think I was even starting to help mow yards,
starting to do their part.
If we would have stayed, we probably had the biggest landscaping business in Florida right now. But Mom just said, "I'm not doing it with these boys."
Not living down there.
Mm-mm.
So how long was Grandpa gone before Grandma said, "Load it up, we're heading to Indiana"?
I'm going to say maybe a month.
It wasn't long. So that tells me Grandma wasn't a huge fan of Grandpa going back without her and the kids.
Mm-mm. And she just decided one day, we're going.
Pack it up. We're leaving.
Pack it up.
So there was no, "Hey guys, this is our plan." There was "You come home from school and we're leaving.
We're packing." And our neighbor, J.C. Metcalf, who's still alive, come down and help us pack the car.
What kind of car was it?
It was a Lincoln. A big old Lincoln.
4-door? Was it like a wagon?
No, it wasn't a wagon. It was a 4-door, but it was a big old Lincoln.
Was that considered a nice car, or was it a junker?
It was a junker. It was an old one.
Yeah, so it was even older than.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like a nice car, and so there was 6 of you, with Mick being gone, right?
Yeah.
So
Tim and Dave were driving. Dave was 14.
Dave had his license,
Or he had your license at 14.
Did they have cars, or do you remember?
Tim had a motorcycle.
So Grandma made everyone pack up and leave.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember any part of that drive coming home?
A couple. One is the tire went bad.
On the interstate or something?
There was no interstate. Well, there were partial interstates at that point. And so she pulled into a gas station, and we stopped and cut the piece of rubber off the tire because it's flopping. And she pulled into a gas station, maybe around Bradenton or something like that. So we're not too far.
Didn't take long.
Yeah. And she said, I'd like to buy 1 tire used. And he said, ma'am, you need 4 tires. And she said, I don't have money for 4 tires. Where were you going? Indiana. He said, I can't let you do that. And he put her 4 tires on. I don't know if they were new or if they were just good used ones.
Did he charge her? Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's an answer to prayer. So there's some prayer going on.
Mm-hmm.
Those are one of those stories that you want to go back to that guy, or you want to go back to that, where exactly it happened at.
Yeah, Tim may be able to tell you where that's at, if he can remember. We wasn't too far down the highway. I know that. Bradenton's a couple hours.
So this guy bailed you out, got Grandma some good tires. What else do you remember about that trip coming back? Anything else?
Alternator went out, and Tim and Dave had to hitchhike to the nearest town. I think if I remember right, Paul might have a better.
So just left you guys on the side of the road?
Yeah, they had to hitchhike to a little town and get.
Do you remember what state you were in when that happened?
I think there was mountains.
Okay, so somewhere around Tennessee.
Georgia, Tennessee. Yeah.
Huh.
Mm-hmm. But that alternator ultimately went out again just before we got to Muncie or Cowan.
Right toward the end of the trip.
Mm-hmm.
So where'd you guys move back to when you come up here?
Grandma McKnight's farm.
Back to the same place they were at when they got married?
Right. Mm-hmm. We were there for, I don't know, a few months.
Okay. And then where'd you move from there?
Well, I went to Cowan Elementary there for a couple months, and then we moved. Daddy was working in Dana, Marion.
Mm-hmm. So
then we moved to just outside of Marion on 9th Street on a farm.
Okay.
And I went to Sweetser Elementary.
Gotcha. So you're basically the east side of Marion.
Mm-hmm.
Was Grandpa or Grandma doing any ministry?
West side of Marion.
Or west side of Marion, that's what I meant. Were they in any kind of ministry? Do you remember going to church?
Well, we went to a church. We went to 2 different churches. One was where Grandma Case was the janitor at, and that's in South Marion by what they call by the VA home.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to that church for just a little while.
Okay.
And then after that, we went to a church in Converse, Indiana, a Wesleyan church.
Mm-hmm. And that's during the time you were going to school at Swayze?
Sweetser.
That's what I meant.
Tim was at Oak Hill. I think Tim graduated from Oak Hill.
Okay.
I don't think Dave graduated from Oak Hill, but I think Tim did.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So at what point, or how old were you when everything transferred to the church that I grew up in Marion? Mm-hmm. How old were you when that transition happened where Grandpa became pastor again?
Yeah, it was a friend from Sweetser, Rick Ferguson, who knew, found out my dad was a minister, and Rick Ferguson's family went to the church in Marion, where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
And they were needing a pastor. And they asked him to come and speak.
Mm-hmm.
And the Tuckers lived next door to the Fergusons, which is how Polly Tucker is Polly McKnight.
Yeah.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
And they were there, and actually, one of my classmates was Trula Mills's daughter in Sweetser. Her name was Patty Mills.
Yeah, I remember Patty.
Mm-hmm.
So that opportunity grew into full-time ministry for both Grandma and Grandpa.
Yeah, and the Tuckers invited, or Patty Mills was at the Tuckers, who Patty came to church with the Tuckers. Our church is how Trula got introduced to our church.
Where was Trula going to church at, or was she?
She wasn't.
So they weren't going to church. Mm-mm. Interesting. So it was Patty, their daughter, that led them
through the Tuckers, through the Fergusons,
led them to the church.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. So how long after Grandpa went there to preach was he asked to be the pastor?
Pretty quickly.
Okay.
They didn't have.
They needed a pastor, and he continued to work full time.
Yeah, but
and do pastor. And when did you move to the Marion house right down the road from the church? Was that shortly after?
Yeah. Well, I was in 4th grade at Cowan. I was in 4th grade at Sweetser and 5th grade. And then I went to 6th grade in Marion.
Gotcha.
So it was in my 4th grade class, right after we'd moved from Fort Myers to Cowan and then to Sweetser, which is my 3rd school for the year.
Yeah.
Is when Janine's dad was my teacher and gave me a smacking.
I remember that story.
I didn't care though. I mean,
Well, I can imagine bouncing around because I look at the twins are in 5th grade. I can't imagine them taking them out of school. Like that would set them back. I feel like because they already are pretty well established. So I imagine bouncing around schools would have been tough for you.
And I already flunked 4th grade.
What
So
did you flunk?
All my friends went on, and I couldn't. And so,
did you flunk because you weren't getting it, or did you flunk because you didn't care?
No, I definitely can't. I don't have phonic sounds. I definitely can't spell. Reading was an absolute nightmare. And to try to get me to write is still today.
So you needed some extra attention that you weren't getting.
I was that spatial child that's left-handed and dyslexic.
Yeah.
And I am the only left-handed boy of the family.
So there are some initial struggles there, and you're bouncing around from school to school.
Yeah, a 3rd school.
You said, so Janine is your brother's daughter-in-law. So Janine's father
was just apparently right out of school.
So he would have been a really young teacher. He gets you as a student, and in the
middle of the year, by the way.
Wasn't. And the joke is, or not the joke, but the story is that he spanked your butt.
That was the only whipping I ever got in school.
Why did he do that?
Because I wouldn't sit up in my chair.
I'm sure there's something else.
No,
you didn't backtalk him.
No, I would never backtalk him.
You just wouldn't sit up in your chair.
I did sit up. I just forgot.
And then slouched back down.
And I slouched back down.
And did he spank you in front of class?
I think he grabbed me and drove me outside and hit me in the butt with a paddle.
1 time or 2 times?
I don't remember 2 times, but I remember getting.
Did it hurt? Or were you more upset that you got embarrassed in front of the other classmates?
I don't remember hurting. But
he was never a big guy.
But yeah, it wasn't, and I don't know. I mean,
do you feel like he was wrong?
He probably was wrong because I wouldn't backtalk or nothing, but I just forgot.
You weren't doing it to be rebellious.
I hated school, so it was like I got to sit here for this, and I don't know what it was.
Yeah,
he'd tell you maybe.
I can see Isaiah acting like that, or at least Isaac or me. I see myself doing that. I obviously got in some trouble at God's Bible School for not wearing my tie properly or just silly stuff. That was more of a sign of rebellion, but
mine wasn't rebellion.
It wasn't rebellion. You just forgot.
Yeah,
you just went into I don't care about this.
I don't care about what you're talking about. Whatever it is.
All right. Well, let's take a break.